Whenever we're having a bad day, sometimes a simple hug from our mothers can make us feel so much better. But what if all those hugs turned out to be a lie? What if all of those loving memories you have of your mother actually involved a shape-shifting beast from beyond the veil? And then we take a look at the story of a young couple living in a trailer out in the woods. They were hoping for a little rest and relaxation before their life became forever chaotic after the birth of their first child. But the forest had other plans, and it was going to do whatever it took to make sure this couple never left the woods. Today on Dead Rabbit Radio. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Dead Rabbit Radio. I'm your host, Jason Carpenter. I'm having a great day. I hope you guys are having a great day too. I hope you guys are having tons of fun doing whatever you're doing. We got a ton of stuff to cover today, so let's get started. First off, running into Dead Rabbit Radio Command. Everyone get on your feet and give it up for our newest Patreon supporter, Kent. Woohoo! Yeah, yeah, he's all running on in. He's breakdancing, spinning around on his head. Wee! And we're just cheering him on for the next 3 hours. He's like, can I stop breakdancing? We're like, nope. You gotta breakdance as long as we're cheering. Kent, you're gonna be our captain, our pilot this episode. If you guys can't support the show financially through the Patreon or YouTube memberships or whatever, that's totally fine. It really, really is. Just help spread the word about Dead Rabbit Radio. That helps out so much. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell everyone you know. Dead Rabbit Radio is your favorite paranormal show. If you do support the Patreon, you do get ad-free episodes and access to the Patreon Discord and all of that stuff as well. So that's added benefits to that. But if you don't, that's fine. It really is. It's fine too. I try not to put too much pressure on you guys. I know life is hard enough. Especially the people on this episode. They're not doing too well. Not Kent. Hopefully he's fine. We're going to profile some bizarre stories. Kent, I'm going to go ahead and toss you a steam shovel and a little engineer's cap. You got a little railroad outfit on, the striped pajamas. I don't know what railroad people wear, but you just probably normal clothes at this point. They're just wearing like dungarees and a shirt, maybe a cowboy hat. We're all hopping on board the Carpenter caboose. Kent, load that coal-burning engine up. Chug, chug, chug us all the way out of Dead Rabbit Radio Command. We're headed to the Netherlands. Chugga, 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 choo, choo. And this story you might find quite simple, but the implications are downright terrifying. So we're about to meet this guy, let's call him Bill. It's not his real name. Bill, when he was around 6 years old, he had this experience. He's laying in bed. It's nighttime. And a little boy in bed, trying to catch some Z's, and he starts to hear footsteps walking up the stairs outside of his bedroom. Walking up the stairs, he's like, oh, I know what's going to happen, dude. This is my favorite part of the night. He didn't say that. I just think it would be cool. He's dancing to the beat of the stairs. He's hearing that's not the thing that he likes. He has a stair fetish. No. He knows what that means. That means his mom is coming in to hug him, and that's his favorite part of the night. And sure enough, because this happens all the time, right? Before he falls asleep, his mom walks in and gives him a hug, wakes him up sometimes. She's like, oh man, the weight of the world on my 6-year-old shoulders. He finally falls asleep. His mom's like, hug me, hug me. Wakes him up. He's like, She comes up. She will say something to him like, you're the most precious boy in the world, Bill. Good night. Mwah. Give him a little hug. Stuff like that, you know? Mom stuff. You're so handsome. You're the handsomest boy in the world. Mwah. This normally happens to him. So when he hears this sound of someone walking up the stairs, he's like, oh, dude, sweet. It's my mom. And then the door opens up, and he's laying there, and in walks his mom. Hey, Billy. You're the smartest kid in the world. I love you. I'm so glad you're my smart little handsome man. Mwah. And he's like, thanks, Mom. Good night, Bill. And Bill, he rolls over in bed. His face is back in the door. what a great way to go to sleep with all that positive affirmation. And he's laying there, and something feels off. Something is not right. And he's laying there, and he's laying there, and he's laying there, and he's trying to wait for this moment to pass. There's something just weird. And he rolls back over, and he sees that his mother is still standing there. She's just standing in his room. And he's looking at her, and he's like, what? This is not part of the game, right? Normally she just tells me I'm awesome and then leaves. Why is she standing in the darkness? But he's not super critical of it, right? He's not like, get out. He's all chasing her around with the broom. Get out of here, Mom. You already kissed me once. He rolls over and he sees that his mom's standing there, and he's kind of looking at her in the darkness, and he's like, this is weird. My mom doesn't normally just stand there and watch me fall asleep. But even as a kid, I mean, Bill's obviously typing this up as an adult, but even as a kid, he noticed something. He goes, I'm looking at the silhouette of my mom. I can't really see any facial features or any detail. I know it's my mom, because it looks like my mom, and there's only one adult female in the house. But something looked off about her. Even though I couldn't see any details, she seemed to be older. She gave a presence that she was older than Mom. She also looked, he could visibly tell from the silhouette, she was a little bit taller, a little bit thinner than his mother. But at age 6, he sees these things, and I think he's recognized them more as an adult, looking back on this story. But as a kid, he rolls over, he sees his mom. He's like, Mom, have you lost weight? Mom, have you gotten taller? What's going on? He doesn't really think about it. It's his mom, so he kind of laughs. He jumps out of bed, runs over, gives her a big hug, laughs a little more, and then he ran back to his bed, jumped under the covers, and laid down. He's laying there again with his back to the room, and a minute passes. And at that point, he rolls back over and he looks, and his mother is gone. She's no longer in the room. Now, this was unusual for his mom to stay there that long. Normally, it was just a quick check-in, a quick saying how awesome he was, and then she would leave. This time, she stayed a little bit longer, and it was just kind of weird. So the next morning, when Bill wakes up and he's headed downstairs, and he gets to the kitchen and his mom's frying up pancakes and eggs and making bacon and all that stuff. He's like, oh man, it's famished last night. You won't believe the night I had Mama gave you a hug. Took a lot of calories out of me. I'm a grown boy. I need extra bacon. He comes downstairs and he goes, hey Mom, it was weird last night. Why were you hanging out in my room for so long? It made me felt like something was off. And you don't normally hang out in my room. And the mom goes, what are you talking about? And he could tell she had like a look of confusion on her face. She's like, what are you talking about? And Bill, that kind of caught Bill off guard, right? He didn't expect his mom to not remember being in the room. And at that point, he really kind of questioned what happened last night. Now, Bill, when he's posting this years later, he's 24. So what, the story took place 18 years ago? He goes, over the years, I've kept bringing that up. I kept asking my mom, hey, remember that time? Here's the thing, dude. Moms are older than anybody, right? Definitely older than you. She didn't remember it the first time. She didn't remember it the morning after. He's like, 18 years later, they're at a family reunion. He's like, Mom, I love you. Remember that time you were hanging out in my room? She's like, Bill, for the last time, I don't remember that. I don't remember that at all. I don't remember being taller and thinner, hanging out in your room. He's like, but Mom. Bill said he's asked her about this several times over the years, what that was. Because that's what he's thinking now, right? That it obviously wasn't his mother. His mother doesn't remember it. When he looks back on it, something seemed off. It didn't physically look like his mother, but who else could it have been? It is a mystery. And you go, well, yeah, Interesting, Jason. That's kind of an interesting, creepy story. I know how much you hate the dark. I know how much you talk about spooky things happening in a bedroom. It's always disturbing. You're always trying to give us, the listeners, nightmares by trying to say you wake up and there's creepy things in our bedrooms. Yeah, it's creepy, but where does it fit in the pantheon of the paranormal? And we'll break that down in a second. First off, this was posted online by someone going by the name Personality Wild 3224. The reason why I wanted to tell the story, because on the one hand, it is a very, very simple story. Who was, or what was in that room with Bill that night? But as I thought about it, I started thinking, how often does this happen? And I'm not even talking about waking up in the middle of the night and seeing the silhouette of your mom. That's super specific, right? You're like, my mom lives 5 states away. I'd be very confused if my mom was in my room during the day. This is what I thought about. How often do you think we've hugged people or talked to people who weren't really them? Because this one stands out simply because he asked the question, hey, Mom, what was it? Why were you in my room so late last night? Like, why'd you hang out for a bit? And she's like, huh? What are you talking about? Had he not asked her that, had he just given this thing a hug and the next morning went downstairs and ate pancakes and bacon and delicious biscuits and gravy and all that stuff, he never questioned it. He would have never told us this story. It would have never fit into his world of the weird. He might have thought it was weird that his mom was a little more gangly than normal. But had the puzzle comes from, and this happens a lot in our paranormal stories. The puzzle comes from the person asking somebody else, hey, what was that? Same thing when we cover stories about shared dreams. We did one of those on Monday's episode. We've done other stories like that. If you just have a nightmare, let's say you even have a reoccurring nightmare, like in Monday's episode, you may chalk it up to just being a weird nightmare. It's when you tell someone else your nightmare and they go, oh my God, I've been having that same dream too. 100%. Now it's paranormal. When it's just a nightmare, even a reoccurring dream, those happen. It's the telling somebody else and getting an odd response is where the paranormal aspect comes from. I wonder if this has ever happened to me. Or you. Because think about it this way. You come home from work, and I don't know, let's just say you live with your brother. I don't even have a brother, I'm an only child. Okay, but I'm trying to talk to everybody at once. Let's just say that you have a brother. You have a brother. Maybe you really do, maybe you really don't. You come home, and your brother's sitting on the couch, and he's reading a magazine. And you're like, hey, bro, what's up, man? I just got home. I'm going to run upstairs and play some video games. And your brother's like, whatever. And you run upstairs and you're playing video games. Later on, you see your brother's car pull up outside your house, and you see your brother get out. Let's say like 2 hours later. You look out your window, you see your brother's car pull up. Your brother get out of the car and walk into the house. If you didn't ask him at that point, hey, what was that all about? Like, I came in 2 hours ago, you're sitting on the couch reading a magazine, and now that I think about it, I didn't even see your car in the driveway. But now 2 hours later, I see your car pull up, and I see you get out, you walk in the house, like, what was that? And your brother would say, no, I've been out all day. I've been out at work. Like, you should be, you bum. You're just walking around playing video games all the time. Get a job. And you're like, you do have a job. I'm a streamer. If you never asked him that, you would never know there was a doppelganger in your house. And I would argue most of us don't ask those questions. If I was playing video games and I saw my brother pull up, I don't care. I'm playing my video games. I'm playing Project Zomboid. I'm doing way more important things than walking downstairs and talking to my brother. And if I don't ask, hey, what was that? And he goes, I was gone all day. You would never go, oh, then what did I see? I would just assume, me personally, considering I'm a paranormal researcher, I should be better at this, but I would just assume, whatever, maybe his car was parked on the street. I would not even give it a second thought. I'd be too busy doing Jason's stuff. And I think that's 99% of us, 99% of the time. We have probably interacted with doppelgangers in our lives and not ever thought of it. How often have you been at your job and someone goes, hey, where's Jerry? I need Jerry. And you go, oh, I saw Jerry earlier. Okay, where'd you see him? Well, I don't remember. I think I saw him back in the nuclear reactor. We work at a nuclear power plant at this point. They're like, what? What's Jerry doing in the nuclear reactor? You're like, I don't know. I'm playing video games. I saw him. And then, this happens to me all the time. This happens to me all the time. I'll go, hey, I saw that person. Someone will go, a day at work. I was like, yeah, I saw him earlier. And then maybe an hour or two later, someone will bring up that person didn't show up to work that day. This happens to me all the time. And what I do is I go, my job is super mundane and so repetitive. I don't know what day it is half the time. I don't know what day it is half the time. If I didn't do this podcast, I would have a much harder time telling days apart. And I have the same answer every single time something like this happens. Oh, I must have been confused. And I probably was. But what if one time I wasn't? You see what I mean? When I was looking at this story at first, I go, oh, it's kind of creepy. A mom that may not be a mom. It's someone standing in the dark. It's all these creepy imagery things that I like. But when I stepped back from it, I thought, this might actually happen more often than not. Now, again, he said that this thing seemed older and looked taller and looked thinner. There were some differences. But again, I don't think he would have ever given this any thought had he not asked his mom the very next day. If he'd waited for a day or two to pass before he brought it up and his mom goes, what are you talking about? You would just go, maybe she doesn't remember. Maybe I was dreaming. All sorts of things. Like if this thing standing in the dark, if he never rolled around, never would have seen it. If he rolled over the first time it was already gone, never would have had a story to tell. Doesn't mean that it wasn't standing in the darkness staring at him. He just didn't observe it. A very certain set of circumstances had to happen for him to tell this story, for him to even remember the story. And I wonder how many times that I've passed doppelgangers at work or have interacted with family members, and because I live in such a bubble, because I'm always just trying to figure out something to do, and once I start doing it, I don't want anything to bug me. I just want to play my video game or watch my movie in peace or read in peace and all that stuff. I wonder how many times we've had that interaction. It's really creepy to think about that. And again, I don't think it's right now you're like, oh, I think my mom's a doppelganger, and doppelgangers must be destroyed. I'm not saying that every time you've seen your mom is a doppelganger. But maybe throughout your life, maybe once or twice you've experienced something like this and you've interacted with it, not knowing it wasn't them. Because a set of circumstances did not get laid out. Again, you see someone in a room that they weren't in at the time. They were actually on the other end of the house. They actually might have been in another place in town. But because you don't put it together when you see them later and you're like, oh, well, that's interesting. I thought they were already home, but whatever. Maybe they left again. I have more important things to do. I have all of these YouTube videos in my watch later list I have to watch. I wonder how often this happens to us and we just don't realize it. Hint, let's go ahead and toss you the keys to the world famous Carpenter Copter. There are two moms in front of all of us. One is the real mom. One is a creature of pure darkness. You have to choose. Flip a coin. Which mom are you going to hug? You know what's actually crazy now that I think about it? What if... I'm just making it scary again. I'm just adding on details. There's nothing in the story to support this. What if when he hugged the fake mom, now he's the doppelganger in her universe? Jason, yeah, sure, I can make up cool sci-fi stuff too. I can do that. I make up all sorts of stuff. You're a doppelganger, Jason. You don't even know it. It'd be weird if what in other people's realities you're the doppelganger. I'll be an extra spooky. I'm like, since I'm not going to be spending much time here, I'm all crawling on the floor, scaring everybody. I'm like, this is going to be hilarious when the Jason of this universe comes back. He's going to have a lot of explaining to do out of all the chaos I cause. Kent, let's go ahead and toss you the keys to the world famous Carpenter Copter. We are leaving behind the Netherlands. Fly us all the way out to Washington. This next story, I'm going to ask you to take a flyer with me, not the helicopter. I want you to hold my hand and trust me on this one, because some of the details, even when I was reading it and writing it out, I was like, this story is insane. In fact, you might argue it's too insane. But stick with me. Maybe I'm hyping it up. Maybe I just talked about you getting sucked in another reality because of your shadow mom. Stick with me, because even when I was researching this, putting this one together, I was like, oh man, this sounds really made up. But I think I've found enough details, or a pivotal amount of details that are true, that I think the story does stand up to scrutiny. We're headed all the way out to Washington, and that's really where we're going to start here. That is as detailed as a location that the person posting this put. But again, I found more information that I think will solidify this. We're headed north of Spokane, Washington. The year is around 2021. And we're about to meet this young man. His name, we'll call him James. And James gets a rock-bottom deal on this patch of land. Land, it's the one thing they don't make anymore. Unless you got money gambling on volcanoes, we don't make any more land. So when you can buy some land, you're in a pretty good spot. What happened was, in this location north of Spokane, Washington, there used to be an aluminum smelter there. And it caused... you really want to buy land, I know. But it caused all sorts of environmental damage, right? An aluminum smelter. They're like, oh, that's it, boys. Now that we've smelted all this aluminum, let's just pour it all over the ground. They're like, aren't we supposed to sell the aluminum? The guy's like, no, I'm really a villain from Captain Planet. I'm here to pollute the world. It was this aluminum smelter plant, and it had polluted the water underneath these plots of land. It was actually like a patch of land that you could put up multiple residences on. The guy got it dirt cheap. And he sets up 2 plots on this land. And on those 2 plots, he had 2 campers. So not 4 campers. Jason, we understood what you meant. 1 camper on 1 plot, 1 camper on the other plot. But it's really kind of like this clearing in the woods. And James kind of is looking at this thing. He's like, this is awesome, dude. I own land. I have these 2 places. I'll live in one of the campers. I'll rent the other one out to someone. Maybe we'll build some houses on here. Life is good. This is dope. But shortly after he moves in, he starts talking to people. He's like, dude, people are like, hey, James, how's that whole, land thing? How's that whole living on pollution thing going? And he's like, not good. Someone's watching me. Someone's constantly watching me, and I can never find any peace. Can you imagine asking someone, hey man, how's things going? And he's like, the paranoia grows, the darkness gets closer each night. You're like, I just expected you to say, your things are going good. He goes, they're in the trees. There are people in the trees. And they're watching me. I'm getting scared. So short answer, things aren't going great. Long answer, I'm being hunted. It's not a comfortable place to live. Now, he had the 2 campers, and he was renting one of the campers out to this man. We'll call him Kenneth. And while Kenneth didn't necessarily mention about, people hiding in the trees, a gnawing sense of paranoia growing each day, he also wasn't having a great time as well. living here. Maybe not in a paranormal way, but things just fell off. Even if you weren't thinking that the forces of evil were amassing against you and they were hiding in the woods surrounding your place, even though if you didn't think that, if your neighbor thought that, you're gonna have a hard go. You're like, hey, James, each morning, how's it going? And you immediately go, oh, why did I ask him that? He's going to start talking about people in the trees again. It's spooky. I don't need to be hearing this people in the trees story. One day, about 3 months after this was all set up, like James had moved in, Kenneth is in the other camper. James is hanging out outside his camper on his property, and all of a sudden this guy walks through the woods. This dude is just like kind of walking through this wooded area. And James sees him. James looks over and sees this guy, and this guy, he'd never seen this guy before, is walking towards James, and James is kind of watching him. And you know in the back of his mind, even people who are like, if you're actually crazy, if you have like a mental illness, I still think you can go, well, maybe I'm not having the most orderly thinking right now. But see, James wasn't having a mental illness. He knew that these people were really in the trees. But at the same time, in the back of his head, he thought, maybe I am just getting paranoid. Maybe I'm a little skittish because I'm on this new plot of land. When he sees someone walking towards him who just emerged from the woods, he doesn't immediately think, oh, that's them. That's their emissary. He doesn't think that this guy poses a threat, which was not a good... This guy definitely was a threat. He walks out of the woods, and he punches James in the jaw as hard as he could. This dude just walks through the woods, walks up to James, and punches him so hard it breaks James's jaw. So James calls the cops, goes to the hospital... In that order, right? In that order. And he's getting his jaw fixed up. And the cops are able to find the guy and arrest him. And when they arrested the dude who's walking through the woods, they're like, why? Did you know him? Did you know James? And he's like, no, I never met the guy before. I really don't have any beef with the guy. But I was walking through the woods. And all of a sudden I was overcome with a overwhelming desire to see if I could kill a man with one punch. The cops are like, whoa, that's a terrifying story. I'm not doing patrol out there anymore. This whole area is going to have to be... Now, what's funny, again, I'm holding back some information we'll get to at the end of the story, but this is not in the middle of nowhere. This is not way up in the mountains. This is actually really close to civilization. And we'll get more into that at the ending, because I kind of want to do all that stuff. But you could really be driving down the road and then walk over to this property. It's pretty well populated. So it's not like he was walking through miles of forest to get here. It's just the guy wandering through the area. But as he was walking through the woods, he felt that he wanted to see, can I punch a guy one time and kill him? And to be fair, to get punched a single time, that was it. James wasn't getting beat up on the ground and having his head slammed against the dirt. No, he got punched once and it broke his jaw. That's a pretty powerful punch. So the guy came pretty close to it. But he said, no, I didn't have a problem with him. I never met him before. I just wanted to see if I could kill a guy with one punch. 2 months after that attack, it was nighttime. And James was sleeping in his camper. And he never woke up. This would be the last night James ever lived on planet Earth. He's sleeping in his camper when a man shows up, just walks into the area, and saw a bike that James had on his property that he wanted to steal. It's a different guy. It's a totally different guy, by the way. The guy's like, oh, I'm out of jail. I just posted bail. Now it's time to get a new Schwinn. This guy walked through the area, saw a bike that he wanted on James's property, and he walked into James's camper, picked up a power tool that was sitting there, and beat James to death. He beat James to death with this power tool. and then took off. I don't know if he took the bike. I don't know if it was a speedy getaway or if he just walked into the darkness. But James was murdered that night. And it was Kenneth who found the body. I don't know if Kenneth heard the murder. I don't know. I mean, it's probably pretty noisy to beat someone to death with a cordless drill. Not making a joke about it, but it'd probably wake you up, is what I'm saying. But it's also possible that Kenneth found out the next day when he woke up and it's like, hey, James, what are we doing today? Are you going to keep talking about the feeling that darkness is soon going to cover this entire plot of land? And, I mean, imagine that, right? Kenneth finds his neighbor and his friend, James, beat to death. Well, so the police were called out to the area. They see that he's beaten to death. They cordon it off. They're doing their investigation because it's a murder. They were investigating the last one. It was just an assault. I'm sure they talked to that guy first. And Kenneth is like, listen, I'm done living here. This is the spookiest place in the world. At first, it was just spooky because James was always talking about how spooky it was. But now, he's been murdered. He's been murdered and the killer is still out there. So I am leaving. So he packed his stuff up and moved out. The police do eventually catch the murderer. But that doesn't give Kenneth any real reason to move back. Because the fact is that his friend and his neighbor got assaulted twice in just a couple months. And the second assault killed him. And there's always this talk about like the woods. And Kenneth is like, no, I don't want to move back there. It's creepy. Bad memories. I don't want to move back there. But 8 months go by and Kenneth cannot find a permanent residence. So he has to move back to the plot of land. It's the only place that he can actually live in for the time being. As creepy as it was living there with a neighbor, it was 10 times worse by yourself. So Kenneth ended up asking assorted friends and family members, hey, does anyone want to live on this plot of land with me? Will somebody please, you get a camper, you get privacy, but it's not in the middle of nowhere. You can still go and do all your grocery shopping and stuff like that. I just can't live out here by myself. So this is when Michael and Samantha enter the picture. Michael and Samantha is not their real names. Michael and Samantha, they're this young couple. Samantha's currently pregnant. And they hear this plea, and really a gift, right? I don't even think they have to pay rent. The landlord is dead. The guy who owned the property is dead, and I'm sure like that's being sorted out with the family and all of that stuff. But for the time being, can you just come out here and live in this camper out in this area? Michael and Samantha go, yeah, that actually we can do that. Again, I don't know. It would be kind of hard to charge rent on a murder house. Especially if the guy was like, please come out here. I'm super spooked. Rent is $1,000 a month. I don't know. But anyways, they do move out there. It's this young starter family. And they go, let's do this. So Michael and Samantha are driving out to the property. And this is where things really escalate. If a man being beat to death that's not even the top thing that's going to happen in this story. This is when things start to get really bizarre. Michael said when him and his wife first pulled onto the property, there's like this long driveway. There's this long dirt driveway that leads off the main road through the woods before you get to this plot of land. And their first time coming out to this property, really, they got everything loaded up. They're ready to move into this camper. Michael's driving down this dirt road. He goes, immediately I'm overcome with a sense of dread. An overwhelming feeling that we are not welcome here. And as he's coming around this big bend in this road before he gets to the plot of land, he's driving and he looks and he stops the car. And he's looking out on the dirt road. Scattered across this dirty driveway are what he says were the bodies of hundreds of dead crows. Now, when I was reading this story, I don't really take a segue, but when I was reading this story, I go, that's a little unrealistic. I mean, a dozen dead crows, I could believe. Hundreds of dead crows, because Michael's the one who posted this. He posted this quite a while ago. He's actually taken it down. But we'll get more into it. Hundreds of dead crows. Which, I mean, again, imagine you just saw 12. That'd be creepy, but you figure, I don't know, maybe they had a dumb leader. Hundreds of dead crows, at that point you go, well, this has to be paranormal. Or, here's the thing, pick your poison. Literally, in this case. Hundreds of dead crows laying across the road. Or the area is so polluted that crows are falling out of the sky. And you have a baby, and your wife's pregnant, right? Dude, what would you prefer? You have to live in this place. They don't. They could have turned the car around at that point and said, let's go to a place not covered in the dead. They decide to drive up anyways. They decide to continue on the way to the camper. But what would you rather want to have, a paranormal threat or a toxicological threat? The idea, like, what would you do? You're driving to your house, your new house, and then you see hundreds of dead crows. Did he just drive over them? Because you would, right? Again, if it was just 12, you could get out and you start kicking them off the side of the road. And so, yeah, gross. You kick them off the side of the road and you drive by. You could not conceivably kick off the corpses of hundreds. You'd be messy at that point. You'd have these super strong legs because you're like, man, what'd you do? You've been training? No, just kicking crows. Kicked hundreds of crows. That's my new workout. Every day I hope that more birds die. They're like, what? Moving hundreds of crows. You probably just drove over them. Which, again, here's the thing, man. He's already scared. He's just pulled onto the property. And he's like, oh, okay, well, that's weird. And then for the next minute, as he's driving down this dirt road, it's just a cacophony of the sounds of crow bones crashing underneath the tires of his Durango. You know what I mean? Like, that's not a great way to enter any property, let alone your new home with your unborn child. Hundreds of dead crows. Anyway, so now Michael knows all of the stories about this land as well. I don't know if Kenneth was like, hey man, can you do me a solid? There's paranoia all the time. People have been murdered here. Michael knew all this stuff, knew the stories about things in the trees, definitely knew the story about James getting murdered. But again, it wasn't just that. It was all of the stuff leading up to it, the paranoia. So Michael's actually really paranoid when he moves in, and he goes, it's true. You definitely did not feel safe here. You always felt like someone was watching you, day or night. Could be middle of the day. You felt like something was staring at you. You never really felt safe. But things got a little bit better. Started to settle in. Right? He's like, honey, what's for dinner tonight? She's like, dead crow stew. He's like, my favorite. I've just developed a taste for that. They took a bunch of those crow corpses, threw them in the freezer. He said things started to really settle down. It's, you can only be paranoid for so long, I guess. Or, go mad. But he goes, things started to settle down, actually. Well, one day, I noticed Kenneth was looking really sick. He's like, hey, Kenneth, you doing okay? You look a little under the weather. And Kenneth is like, yeah, I'm fine. I'm throwing up all over the ground. Michael's like, oh, okay, well, you might say you're fine, but your body's saying that you're sick. No, dude, it's cool. It's just, the smell of dead crows. Why do you guys keep eating those? Michael's eating a crow kebab at that moment. He's like, wow, this is delicious. Blah! Kenneth keeps throwing up, so they take him to the hospital. Like, he can't stop puking. He's so sick, they take him to the hospital, and when they get there, he's doing much better. He's sitting in the hospital bed, he's like, oh, finally, I'm safe from that horrific place. And he's like, oh, what's on television? It's the crow. He's like, ah! Eventually, though, he's better. He goes back home. And things still kind of even out. Now we're going to do a little bit more of a time jump. We're 1 year and 3 days since James was murdered in his camper. Michael and his wife, Samantha, are hanging out when all of a sudden Kenneth runs out of his own camper and goes, "I can't breathe! I can't breathe!" And he's panicking and he's running around. Michael's like, "Dude, Kenneth, what's the matter?" I can't breathe. And Michael jumps in his car, revs it up, and begins flying out of the lot. He's driving out of the area when he loses control of his vehicle and smashes right into a tree. Michael runs across the lot, sees the car crash into the tree, steam shooting out of the engine. He runs to the door and he looks inside the window, and there is Kenneth with a look that can only be described as primal fear on his face. And he sat there clutching his chest, gasping for air, but he can't breathe. And then he dies. Michael watches Kenneth die right in front of him. Ambulance is called. All of this is taken care of. Now it's just Michael and Samantha living on this piece of land, and Michael figures that they should move out, right? 2 people have died here now. Place, at the very least, gives off a really, really foreboding energy. The very most, it may be killing people. But Michael and Samantha decide to stay. And I think, again, at a certain point, economic factors come in. Saving every dime. They should have moved. Michael knows that they should have moved, but they stuck around. One day, Michael went out to this drum where they stored water at. Walked out to this drum. And the way the drum was set up, it had this 1-inch opening on the top. Just a little opening. But as he's walking over to the water drum, he walks over to the water drum, he takes the lid off because he's going to get some water out of it, and he's hit with the overwhelming stench of rotting flesh. It was chunks of chipmunks floating in the water. Everything from chipmunk thighs to chipmunk eyes. It was like someone had chopped up a bunch of chipmunks, tossed them in this barrel. And he said that's exactly what it looked like. It looked like they were placed. He goes, there's no way that all these chipmunk guts got in through this 1-inch hole. Could you imagine you turn on your faucet and chipmunk blood starts shooting out of it? You're all, Alvin! What did you do to your brothers? Chopped up chipmunks in his water container. He said the place is getting worse. I would argue it can't get much worse than that. He said the place is getting worse. He goes, we're feeling way more uneasy. We don't feel safe. We're staying there, but we don't feel safe. One night, he took his wife out to a nice non-chipmunk mutilated body place. He's like, hey, we're going to the Outback Steakhouse. No fur here. He said we left to spend the night out, have a nice meal, and we're coming back to the place, and as we were driving back down that dirt road to the lot, he goes, I felt the worst fear I'd ever felt in my life. Even worse than the overwhelming dread the first time I showed up. Now, he felt terrified beyond reason. He didn't even think a person could be this scared. And what he saw was nothing. Not that the campers were gone, not that all the stuff was gone on the property. No, it was all there. The campers were there. Everything laid outside was there. The barrel of water that hopefully had been emptied at this point and cleaned was there. Michael and Samantha get out of their vehicle and they walk into their camper and they see nothing. As in, nothing wrong. Every single thing that should have been there was there. Nothing was missing. Nothing was out of place. But he knew something was wrong. Let me read you this exact quote, because I think this kind of sums it up. He goes, quote, "Everything looked different. Although everything was right where we left it, nothing seemed in place." Unquote. Imagine walking into your house and it looks exactly like it did when you left, but it didn't. It wasn't the same place. Everything is exactly how you remember it. Everything is exactly where it should be, but it's not right. This is true paranoia. This is where you would ring someone else in and say, someone's been in my place, and you're like, no, your place has always looked like this. I know it looks like it, but it's not. Everything is where it should be, but nothing is in the right place. Like, this is true paranoia going on. Michael starts looking around for any answer of why this could be happening. Like, why is he having this feeling? And he sees on a stump out in the darkness surrounding the campers, there's a stump. And sitting on that stump is a orange cat with intense eyes, almost glowing, almost in flames. This cat with these penetrating, fiery eyes is just sitting there on this stump, watching Michael and Samantha. They begin to hear the sound of branches snapping in the woods, pine needles crushed underfoot. It's coming from all directions. It's surrounding them. This sound of something or some things moving through the woods towards them. And that's when they both hear a voice call to them from the darkness of the surrounding woods. Hello? Is anyone out here? Samantha, it sounds like a little girl. Sounds like a little girl crying out from the darkness. Hello? Is anyone out here? And Samantha instinctively wants to help this kid. She's not thinking logically, right? It's like it's her first day on the plot of land. She yells out to the little girl, "Hello, are you okay?" And that's when the voice says, "Help! Help me! Help me! Help!" Begins crying out from the woods. The sound of the stomping through the woods has ended. It's now just the sound of this little girl screaming for help. And Michael and Samantha, they do think that there might really be a little girl out there. They know the woods are dangerous. They've experienced some of it themselves. If a girl happened to be lost or wandering through the woods or whatever, it's like, you wouldn't want to leave her alone. I mean, I would. I'm assuming that's paranormal as well. I'm not going to make the assumption that it's a real little girl in the middle of the night, but they begin yelling out, "Hello! Is anyone there? Honey, just keep coming towards our voice. It's safe, quote unquote. It's safe here. As long as you don't like drinking water. Come on, honey." And they're trying to call out to this girl. And the girl just keeps responding, "Help! Help me!" This goes on. The voice is saying help. They're trying to help. They're trying to figure out where she is, but they don't really want to just walk into the woods to find out where this little girl is. And when all of a sudden the girl in the forest screamed out, "Somebody help me!" To Michael, the voice this time seemed evil. Pure evil. It was an adult woman's voice, not a child. And there was no love or fear in it. It was hate. Samantha must have heard a different thing because she immediately begins to walk towards the woods to find the little girl. She probably heard the same words, but a different meaning behind them because she just begins to walk towards the woods. And Michael has to grab her by the arm and says, "Samantha, what are you doing?" We got to find that little girl. We got to find that little girl and save her. And he's like, "Yeah, I agree with that in principle, but let's get in the truck and we'll just like shine our headlights and drive around the perimeter and we're not walking in the woods." "But honey, we need to go find this little girl. She's out there by herself." "We're not going." I'm not saying we're going to leave her, but I'm just saying let's get in the truck and search for her that way. And Michael really had to drag his wife back to the car and get her into the truck. She was hook, line, and sinker enraptured by whatever this thing was in the woods. And he had to physically force his pregnant wife into the truck and say, "We will find her, but we're going to do it in the truck." And he's driving around this area, and they are screaming out, "Are you there? Where are you at? Where are you at, honey?" He has the headlights fully on, and they're still trying to find out where this voice is coming from. "Somebody help me! Somebody, won't anyone help me?" And he goes, "But no matter where we were at, the voice always seemed to be coming from somewhere else in the woods." But it did sound closer now. Even though they couldn't tell which direction it was in, it sounded like it was closer to them than it was when they were just standing outside, calling out, "Where are you at, honey? We want to help you. Where are you at?" He can tell that it's getting closer. Michael and Samantha are yelling out, trying to get a beat on where this little girl might be. He's driving around. The voice is getting closer. And then, as if the voice was coming from inside the truck, he heard it like it was right next to them. He heard it like whatever was screaming out for help was in the truck itself. It said, "Help me! Somebody help!" So loud. The voice was so close and so loud that Michael's ears started ringing. It was screaming in the truck, and he's like, "Nope." He should have said that when he saw the dead crows, and he's like, "I'm out of here." He goes, "We sped out of that area. We're flying down the road." He goes, "We called the police. We called the police and said," and this is what I recommend, don't call the police and say you saw a Bigfoot. Don't call the police and say, "Hey, we think that there's some ghost monster in the woods." They called the police and said, "We think there's a little girl lost in the woods by our place. We heard someone calling for help." And the police showed up to the property. They searched it. They didn't find anything. The next day they returned. They picked up all their stuff. They began moving out, right? That was the nope moment for them. They weren't going to live there anymore. But I think they did stay there a couple more times. No activity reported, just because, again, how things work out. But they had already started moving out. And then after Samantha gave birth to their child, he goes, "We never went back. We were completely moved out by then." Michael ends this post by, this is a reasonable question. What the hell could do these things? It's such a varied activities, right? We had all sorts of stuff. Especially, it wasn't just voices in the wood. It was people seemingly under the control of something, walking through the woods, beating people, walking through the woods, murdering somebody. I'm sure those two are related. What the hell could do these things? I never even believed in paranormal things before, but I don't know what else happened. That's how Michael ends this post. He posted this story online. Now, here's the thing. Thank you for going on this journey with me. I'm going to... A lot of this stuff is very unbelievable, even in the world of the paranormal. Like, I read this stuff all the time. And while I'm not an expert by any means, I do try to get rid of stuff that I think is not true. There are some stories that I've covered where I've been like, this one I'm taking a flyer on. But those are usually the stories I sit on the longest. I had that story recently about the burglar who broke into the house with the grandmother. She kept having like a heart attack or something like that, and the ghost of her husband showed up to scare the burglar away. I really love that story, but that is a story for a while I go, I don't know if this story is real. It's so fantastic. It's such a great story. Somebody might have made it up. Every so often, I dismiss a lot of stories because of that. And then sometimes I just got to take the risk. I go, listen, I really like this story. It could be made up because it just works so well. And I think even in those episodes, I'll say this main, I'm taking a flyer on this one. I'm taking a chance on this one. This one was very interesting because I sat there, and we'll get into the paranormal part, but I just wanted to do this. So I read this and I go, this story's made up. It's just so graphic and so creepy in such a way. And hundreds of dead crows. I probably wouldn't have thought anything of it if there was just a dozen. Chipmunk meat. Everybody knows that's the most delicious of all meats. I'd love to have that floating in my water. So, I said, is there anything in the story I can verify? Because obviously you could always contact the person who posted it and they could say, well, yeah, it happened, da-da-da-da-da. There were two key details in this story that you're able to verify. And I think it's enough. This is posted online by someone going by the name Calligrapher Pitiful 3. I read this story, and he said it took place in a location north of Spokane, Washington. Aluminum smelter used to be in this area, polluted it. Found an article from Mead, Washington, where there used to be an aluminum smelter there a long time ago. And now all this land had been discounted because it had been polluted. I was like, okay. So those details line up. North of Spokane, Washington is the town of Mead. A long time ago, there was an aluminum smelter there, and they've been selling the land at a discount. In fact, part of it, because you can look this up on Google Maps now. I couldn't tell you exactly where this address was, but you can look and see where all the roads, because that's how I knew it wasn't in the middle of nowhere. North of Spokane, Washington, Canada's north of Spokane, Washington, I was able to look at this area of Mead, Washington. And you can match up to, in news reports, where the aluminum plant was, where this land most likely was. They're actually talking about putting up a 1,400 residence mixed use development. So houses and apartments and all sorts of stuff in this area. They're not all going to be crammed on this single plot of land, but they're going to develop this whole area that has been bought at a discount. 1,400 people are going to be living where this story just took place, where, again, it's not all on that patch of land, but in this general area. Some of those houses or one of those apartment complexes will be on this land. And you go, okay, Jason, well, you found the story. The guy said aluminum smelter north of Spokane. Sure, that matches up. It would be an odd detail to make up without explicitly saying it. He could have said the story took place in Mead, Washington. Da-da-da-da-da. Sorry if this is boring to you. I love stuff like this. I love finding this stuff while I'm researching. To me, it's one of my favorite things about researching is spending just a little extra time. I'm not just trying to tell you a spooky story. I love this part of it. Then I thought, okay, so Mead, Washington. Let's find out. There's one other thing in here that would be public records. The murder. July 4th, 2020. Mead, Washington. James Peterson, 41 years old, was beaten to death by a 23-year-old man named Pierre Rhodes over a bike. He was beaten to death with a power tool. Apparently, Pierre lived nearby in a homeless camp. And he wandered out of that homeless camp one day, walked through the woods, and ended up killing James Peterson. So I think this story is legit. The only information that Michael gave us, and again, that was a fake name. James was the guy's real name. He just said J. He only called James J, used the first initial. James was murdered in his sleep. The guy who murdered him was 19 years old who wanted to steal the bike. He was beaten to death with a power tool that was lying on the floor nearby. It's interesting because he could have included the information that I found, right? He could have said it took place in Mead, Washington. This was the guy's name. This is when the murder took place. But he didn't. We were able to find it. And I think that is why I think this story is true. He, in a way, was underselling it. Because he could have posted, like, I'll have in the show notes, the news article, articles about the developments, the article about the murders. He could have included that stuff in his narrative to sell it. The fact that he didn't makes me think that it is true, that he did actually experience these things. And we have to wrap it up. I know I spent a lot of time talking about the research, but I wanted to show you that I do, as fantastical as this story is, there's enough stuff we can prove that if he was going to lie about the hundreds of dead crows, but then tie it to real news stories that he himself didn't link to, it would be weird. It would be as weird as hundreds of dead crows. I think you guys get what I'm saying. He didn't include any of these links. I had to spend time digging it up and was able to match those parts of the story. Really, the question then comes, what is it? And much like yesterday's episode, we don't know. You can obviously attribute it to some sort of evil in the woods. Now, some people online, when he posted this, said that you guys might have all been drinking polluted water. It could be that the area is so polluted it's actually affecting everyone's mental health. And Michael did address that. He goes, that is definitely a possibility. He said, but apparently, and corporations aren't known to lie, but apparently there had been testing in the area. It was the water table that was polluted. It wasn't the soil itself. That's why they had the drum of water and they didn't have a well. So he goes, it's not impossible, but it's unlikely, was his state. And as far as we can tell, the baby's healthy, thankfully. But it's a crazy story. I think it's something evil in the woods, and it really just hated humans. It was dragging these people through the woods. I mean, the one guy, James, got attacked viciously. I do just all of a sudden have the thought he wanted to punch someone and see if he could kill him with one punch. And then a couple months later, James is murdered. We can't forget Kenneth, who most likely was murdered by this force as well. Who knows what he was experiencing in his camper when he ran out, and all of a sudden, I can't breathe. And then he's driving away, crashes and dies, and just has this look of utter fear etched across his face. So 2 lives were taken by this area. And who knows, before this, right, were natives in the area where they're like, no, we don't go out there. It's terrifying, right? We don't go out there. We give it a wide berth. Were there pioneers after the Oregon Trail out in this area and they'd built a cabin and they died or were ran off or walked into the woods and were never found again? But, you know, it's happening in 1886. They're not keeping records. There's no digital archive I can look into. If a pioneer went missing back then, a bear got him. You wouldn't think, oh, it was the voice in the woods that summoned them. And now, in this area, they're going to put up apartments and homes for 1,400 people. And at least one of those homes, maybe more, will be placed on this property. A family will move in, not knowing any of these stories. Michael knew the stories. He had heard the stories. James and Kenneth, they didn't know about it before they moved in, but they definitely learned very quickly about it. You're going to have a family move into this area, or maybe even an entire apartment complex put in this area, and no one's going to know the stories of how this part of the world in the beautiful Pacific Northwest drives men mad. And if you think that this force of evil is already extremely powerful, which it is, to do all of this stuff, just to kill living beings the way that it did would have to be extremely powerful. Humans and birds and chipmunks. Imagine the fury it will have towards us when it's home, when those woods are clear cut to make the land nice and clean to put up even more homes. If whatever this was mad at humans moving into the area, it will become enraged when its own domicile is destroyed, so even more humans can be fit into this patch of land. And with as strong as it is, and as mad as it will be, if the woods are cut down, and cramming in so many people into this area, if we thought these stories were disturbing, I have a feeling we haven't seen nothing yet. Things are going to get a lot worse for the residents of Mead, Washington. Because evil never sleeps. DeadRabbitRadio@gmail.com is going to be our email address. You can also hit us up at Facebook.com/DeadRabbitRadio. TikTok is @DeadRabbitRadio. Dead Rabbit Radio is the daily paranormal conspiracy and true crime podcast. You don't have to listen to it every day, but I'm so glad you listened to it.